Here we go. Just give it a few seconds to catch up. Let me pin this to the top. Just let a few people start seeing the feed. Let me get this shared to my personal page. I really do need to invest in a proper secretary. There we go.
Tag me in anything, I can obviously share it to my page as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. What I'll do is I will tag you in this. Share to my page. My wife is in here. Share to my page. Turn that down. Yeah, just catch up. Hi guys. I know it's been a while, but it's episode 31 of Live and Undrugged. As always, sponsored by No Means City Clothing, Armour Scaffolding, and thanks in part to Mr. James Jeffries. Tonight I'm speaking to Eugene Scardifield, and we're going to be talking about the stigma of murder and trauma of losing people to murder. I've not heard Eugene's story before, but I know it's going to be a good one. Hello, mate. Thanks for coming on. I just want to go back to the start. So can we go back to your childhood and how you grew up and things like that?
I was one of five. My mum and my father, we'll call him father for the purpose of this, had me and my brother Michael, but he left, done a bit of a disappearing act when I was about 9 months old. My mum then got with the father of my three sisters. Childhood life was pretty mundane for me. You know, I was just a typical boy's boy, like going out playing football, getting dirty, that sort of stuff. So my stepfather pretty much left me alone. My brother Michael wasn't so much like that. He was quite shy, quite timid, a bit bashful, so he didn't like to go out much, didn't like to get dirty. And because my stepfather was a petty officer in the Navy, he kind of frowned upon my brother and how my brother was as a child, even to the point where he wouldn't call him Michael, he'd call him Michel. And bearing in mind at this time, Michael was only about 9 or 10. Used to say to him that he'd be nothing but a druggie and an alkie when he grew up. And again, this is like at the age of 10. So obviously it didn't help with my brother's confidence. It didn't help with, you know, those sort of social anxieties that he already had at quite a young age. So it wasn't the best childhood, definitely not for my brother. So yeah, we moved around sort of a fair bit when we was younger. So I went to a few different schools due to him being in the Navy. So yeah, that was, you know, mum was mum. Mum was your typical mum, you know, and I've got a lot to be grateful for my mum growing up. She had a period of time, obviously, when she split from my stepfather, where she was a single parent. So she was having to be the loving mother, but also the disciplinarian of the house as well. So I got all the love and affection, but I've definitely got the discipline as well. But, you know, I grew to respect my mum and respect her as a mum, respect her as a father, respect her as a woman. Yeah, got a lot of love from my mum.
Yeah, so then going into, you know, later in your sort of teens and early adulthood,
Me and Michael, like I say, we were very much chalk and cheese. We didn't have that much of a relationship sort of when we were kids because we were so opposite. As we sort of grew to be teenagers, our bond definitely grew as well. And our love for each other grew. We found common things. I'm a football fan, so Mike would watch football games with me. Mike was massively into his music and his films, so you know I would watch films with him and listen to music that he listened to. It was just a kind of natural progression, I suppose, into late teens and into adulthood.
So take me to take me to what happened.
Well, Mike actually moved. I live in the Portsmouth area, but Mike had actually moved away to go and live in Stoke to be with a woman, a lovely woman called Nikki. And things didn't work out for them, unfortunately, but Mike stayed up there, had a couple of more kids. And in 2015, I was driving to the cemetery. My cousin unfortunately died of cystic fibrosis when she was 6. And on her birthday every year, I'd go down the cemetery and put some flowers on her grave. And in 2015, I was on my way to the cemetery when my phone rang. Wasn't connected to the Bluetooth, so I pulled over to take the call, and it was the piercing screams of my mum. Mike's dead. Your brother's dead. And it felt like I'd been punched in the stomach and in the throat and in the heart all at the same time. I couldn't breathe, but I was reaching because I felt sick. Just crying my eyes out, saying, no, not Michael, not Michael. And even at that point, I didn't know how he had died, just that he was dead. It was only then that when I went to my mum's, composed myself enough to drive to my mum's. When I got to my mum's, I found out in the manner of which he was taken, and he was murdered.
That's rough. I know how you feel there. So can you tell me anything surrounding his murder? What happened? What you know that happened?
The story we got, Mike was around one of his mates' houses. Just sat around having a chat with his mate, and I think there was a couple of others there as well. But this guy had to go out, I think it was he had to go shopping or whatever he had to do. He had to go, so he asked everyone to leave. And my brother said to this lad, "I'll come back tomorrow if you want, we'll have a couple of drinks." And the guy that he invited back murdered him in his front room. Put a strap of a bag around his neck and strangled him. And in his words, until his legs stopped kicking. He then left my brother's place and went and told six various people that he knew what he had done. I think a couple of them said they thought it wasn't true, but they went round to my brother's anyway to check on him, tried to kick his door in because he obviously wasn't answering. The police got called because obviously they were seen trying to kick someone's door in. And obviously when the police went in, that's when they found my brother. And they picked the perpetrator up however many hours later. One thing about my brother, he wasn't a confrontational person at all. He wouldn't have a fight even if he knew hands down he was going to win. That just wasn't my brother. It just wasn't him. He was a lover, not a fighter, as the old saying goes. If you turned up on my brother's doorstep and you was hungry and he only had one tin of beans, he'd get 2 spoons out. That was my brother. He wouldn't ever see you wouldn't ever see anybody go without. And whether that was, like I say, sharing a bit of food, sharing a bit of drink, a shoulder to cry on, an ear to chew, whatever my brother was going through in his life, he would put aside his problems to be there for other people. And unfortunately, that was his downfall. This guy decided to pick my brother.
Did you get any explanation on why? Was it just...
No, he changed his story countless times, lied in court. At one point he tried to say it was an accident. But the pathologist said that the damage that was caused to my brother's neck, he would have had to have been strangling him for between 30 and 45 seconds, I think it was, which might not sound a lot, but
it's a long time.
It's long enough for him to know what he was doing. I said my brother didn't have no defensive wounds, so you rule out a fight. There was no fight, and I think this is one of the reasons why it's led me to talk about my story as much as I do. It's because of media portrayal. If something isn't gruesome enough, the newspapers just make stuff up to add in there. I think one newspaper said that it was a drink and drug fueled fight, and they released this story before the pathologist had even released the toxicology reports. Unfortunately, like I say, the media do tend to just throw things in there as they wish.
They do. I've spoken to a few people now on this podcast that have had run-ins with the mainstream media, especially Terry Anton. Bless him, I had him on a few weeks ago, and he had massive problems with the press just telling lies, because of the freedom of the press. They can say pretty much whatever they like without sort of retribution, and it really is heartbreaking to know that, because I know of families that, like yourself, that have lost people, and it's all been twisted. When we lost my niece, it was all sort of not put right in the press, and it never sat right with me. So I can really feel you on that sort of level. It's one of the reasons why I sort of demand that people are open and honest on here, and say how it is, because John Crilly, that I had on a couple of weeks ago, who no doubt saved the lives of countless people by helping take down the London Bridge bomber. The press tried to slaughter him by telling loads of lies. And when I was researching his story, the press said he was an out-and-out murderer, and he isn't, and that's not true. I found that out. So how did you as a person then sort of deal with the press and the sort of the back end of what's happened?
I hit the drink, and I hit the drink really, really hard, to the point I was drinking to dangerous levels every day. It got to the point where actually in 1 week I drank 8 litres of rum in a week, and to no effect, because the shock and the denial and the numbness and the confusion and the sadness and the anger and all those emotions that you go through when you have a loved one taken in such a way, it kind of overrides everything. And I was in denial to the extent I was drinking. I was in denial to the worry that I was putting on my mum, you know, my siblings and my family. So maybe, you know, there's an element of selfishness there as well. And what I was doing, I was killing myself. And, you know, my mum was at risk of burying a second child. And, you know, this is, you know, another thing that I've been trying to educate people on is the ripple effects of, you know, murder and manslaughter. You know, the devastating ripple effects of murder and manslaughter has on families. So I sought help from a charity called Sam National, which is support after murder and manslaughter. Everybody that works for Sam has had a loved one taken by murder or manslaughter. So obviously they generally know what you're going through. Sort of anything that you sort of say to them, it's not something new to them. Obviously it's new to me, but it's not new to them. And it's only when you speak to these people, you realise that you're not quite going a little bit mad in the head, you know, because I was finding myself in places and not knowing how I got there. I was, you know, putting keys in the fridge, finding things in places that, you know, where they shouldn't be. And it's only when you share those experiences with other people that you realise it is normal, should we call it, for someone to do this, experience such trauma. So I started, and you know, carrying on with, you know, the newspapers, the medias. Everyone's got such a mindset around murder and manslaughter that there's no smoke without fire due to more media portrayal. People only ever read about gang-related, race-related, addiction, you know, drugs, or obviously child murder. That obviously gets in the papers, but they don't actually make up. I think, well, in 2015, when my brother was murdered, there was 573 murders in this country. That's just murder, not manslaughter. That's just murder. I mean, that's shocking statistics. And in 2015, only less than 10% were the you know, what I've just mentioned. The actual highest rate of murder or manslaughter is actually domestic. More women lose their lives to murder or manslaughter by an ex-partner or partner than anybody else. About 2 a week. And the rest of people like my brother, you know, just innocent people that were wrong place, wrong time, or mistaken identity, or picked on for being too nice and having a good heart.
Yeah. It's the I want to talk about trauma and grief, because it, like you say, it does do funny things to you. It doesn't just affect your mind; it affects your body as well. And you know, I found myself in sort of auto mode. You know, not really thinking. And lots of people never get past that trauma, and they never get past that grief, for many reasons. One of them is drink and drugs, using them as a mask. You know, many people never go to charities. What would you say the charity was called? Sam's?
Yeah, Sam National, yeah.
Sam National. There's one here that deals with grief called Nelson's Journey. You know, losing people. And I don't think people realise how much grief does affect you, and how it sort of changes you, it rewires you in your mind. And especially when it's something as violent as murder and manslaughter, and the stigma that's around that. Because when you tell somebody, they're like, "Oh," and you know, they kind of back off. You know, so you know, what sort of things did you put into, I'd imagine coming off the drink and stuff, what sort of things did you put into practice to help you with your trauma?
Well, the first thing I did, I wanted to keep Michael's memory alive, and I wanted to give back to the charity. And the only thing that I could think of that rhymed with Michael was cycle. So I set up an event from start to finish called Cycle for Michael, and it was a bike ride that saw me cycle from Portsmouth to the charity's retreat in Crewe in 2 days. I cycled 135 miles on the first day and 91 miles on the second day. And I raised £7,000, I think it was, for the charity for that event.
Wow. That's some endurance. I don't think I could do that.
I trained for 11 months. It's not like I just sort of jumped on the bike and went and did it. Obviously I had to put the training in. And then obviously do all the PR around it using obviously social media and hypocritically using the newspapers, going to the newspapers and obviously telling my story and telling people what I was doing and who for. Even in that, you don't get 100% of what you want printed. They just tend to pick up the bits that they want and print what they want. But even with doing that, with everything I've ever done, there's always the low afterwards. So obviously my focus was training, was contacting the media and the PR and so on and so forth. But once that event's finished, then you're left with why you did it. So once I'd complete that event, I found myself drinking again. So again, I had to find something else. And that's what I've got to do now. I've got to constantly find something else to do. So that was, I've done Cycle for Michael in 2017. I've done the Three Peaks Challenge, Ben Nevis, Scarfield Pike and Snowdon in 2018. I've done a skydive in 2019. I set up a Facebook page called Life After Murder and Manslaughter on Facebook. Everything that I ever go through, everything I ever feel, I've put it on social media. And I found that with that, I've had people from all around the world sort of who have had a loved one taken by murder or manslaughter resonate with my words, and they say that, what I write is a good comfort for them. They can resonate, that they now know that they're not alone in their thoughts and feelings. So it's something you don't ever get over. Like you said, it affects you mentally, physically. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I still have nightmares now. The night before I was due to do the Three Peaks Challenge, I had a nightmare that I was stabbed to death on the top of Ben Nevis. So I had to take that nightmare with me up that mountain. There's a constant fear of history repeating itself. Michael was murdered when he was 40. He just found out he was going to be a dad again. So he never got to see the birth of his child. When I turned 40, I found out I was going to be a dad again. So not only did I have that, like I say, that fear of history repeating itself, because there's, serious psychological damage that this has on you. Once my child was born, I then had the guilt of being there for my child's birth when my brother wasn't. So it's like you say, it's never ending. And I have to constantly find something to do, which tends to be stuff for charity. I've climbed Snowdon again for charity. I've done a cycle ride for prostate cancer. I've cycled from Preston to London. Next year I'm cycling from Land's End to John O'Groats, 1,000 miles. I'm doing that for the Rowans Hospice. Because the second I stop, the second it all comes flooding back. I think this is something that people don't realise. And again, going back to the stigma and the mentality around murder and manslaughter, people automatically assume that once that person's locked up, that's it, job done. And it's not. the day they get locked up is the day that we serve our whole life sentence up here. They don't serve a whole life sentence. They get, he got 18 years. Other people have had less. They at some point could possibly come out of prison and start a new life. We can't. We don't get parole. We don't get day release. There's no escape from. And this cell up here is a lot smaller and a lot darker than the one they're in.
It is. It is. I agree with you 100%. And the reason that I do so many of these is because I like to sort of educate. And the fact is that when you lose someone to in such a violent way, and I class suicide like that as well, then it's not just that one person that suffered. It's a whole family. It tears whole families apart. It obliterates them, to be honest, and it keeps you in your head for a long time. And what you were saying about foreshadowing, these are the things that sorry, hang on a sec. Thank you. My kids bring me a drink. One of the things that happens is that we get locked up in our own thoughts, and it's not. That's the one thing that is the most difficult thing, being in your own head. Now, I've been in a cell, and I've been in my own head, and I've been able to focus my thoughts on something else, because that's an external cell. But that internal cell in there that you're forced into, because you are imprisoned in it, it's a killer. It's a real killer. And unless you seek help, like you did, like I did, and unless you start looking at building a trauma-informed society and informing yourself on trauma and working with your own trauma, many people don't get out of it. And that's one thing I commend you for, doing all these things, because these are the things that are going to keep you sort of away from the dangerous behaviour. But, can I ask, what about if there is no next physical challenge? Do you have a 12-step program that you work with, or are you going to be looking at working on your drinking in a different way? Or
I think I only ever think of a next challenge, and I haven't got to the point where there hasn't been one, so I haven't had to think any further than that. My writing helps. And my writing, not only, it helps me, but knowing that it helps others helps me. I call everything Michael's journey, Michael's legacy. Michael would have saved the world one person at a time if he could have. So I'm just continuing with his legacy. Everything I do, like I said, I've done it for Sam National, I've done it for the British Lung Foundation, I've done it for prostate cancer. Everything I do, even if I raise 50 quid, it's going to contribute to helping someone. So that's good for my mental health. I don't ever think about what I do.
No.
I think about the repercussions of what I do. How what I do is going to help. And, people have said, oh, you're inspirational, you're a hero, you've done this. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm just a broken-hearted brother who made a promise to his family to keep his brother's memory alive. That's it.
That's the thing about brokenness, isn't it?
I don't get no sense of pride in anything I do, because even when I've done these events, self-harm comes in all forms. And that can even be exercise. I've pushed myself till I hurt. And one of the reasons I do it is because pain is a privilege I've got that my brother hasn't.
Yeah.
So,
I understand that, and I understand that there's some catharsis in that. So, I find catharsis in this. This is how I deal with my life and what I've done and what I've experienced. This and the writing and the books and the films and stuff like that. That's what I put myself into. But I do work a 12-step program as well, and I'm a man of faith. I go to church and I believe in God, and these are all things that help me. But I can understand the need to just do something, do anything, just to, because we would have done something, anything, just to get that next hit. And I think we have to look at it like, well, if we experience that in the bad, then we need to look how we can then utilize that for the good. Tell me about your writing.
the writing first started when I was drinking. Well, if you go back before Michael was taken, never wrote anything other than shit jokes on Facebook. That's pretty much all. That was pretty much my level of writing. But something changed up here and in here when Mike was taken. And when I'd had a drink, I was able to let all my inhibitions go. Depending on what emotion I was going through was depending on the thought process behind what I was writing. It could have been feeling angry, and this is it. I want the whole world to know I'm angry and why I'm angry. I want the whole world to know what that bastard has done to me and my family. On another occasion, it could be I heard a song and it made me cry, and then whatever I was feeling in that moment, I would write. But I found the more I did it, the more awareness I was obviously raising, the more people were saying that I should write a book. I said I could never write a book, I'd have to be an alcoholic. But also more people that was suffering the same loss as what I was coming, was requesting me on Facebook. I think I've got nearly 200 people on my Facebook that have had a loved one taken by murder or manslaughter. But I've got to the point now where I can do it without drink, which is an important step for me. And I'm not going to sit here and lie and say everything I write now is without alcohol, because it's not. Some of it still is. Some of it still is alcohol fused. But it's the truth. Everything I write is how I'm feeling in that moment. Sometimes I'll have something ticking over in my head for a few days. I'll get these moments I call waves. And it's how I'm feeling, at that particular time. I start to get this like trembling in my body, kind of like I've eaten 24 Krispy Kreme donuts. It feels like I'm on like a bit of a sugar rush. I'm like sort of shaking, and I can feel all these emotions sort of resurfacing. So yeah, and it's kind of again in those times when I tend to write or tend to have something going over in my head. Like I say, sometimes it's a few days, it's something would be ticking over. Sometimes I just, like, I think it was 2 o'clock this morning, I wrote a poem. And it was literally just come out. It's not like I had to think about it. It's not like I wrote some, went away, come back, wrote some more. It was, I literally wrote it at 2 o'clock this morning in that moment. And I did end up releasing a book of thoughts and feelings and poetry, and I called it Life After Murder, a tortured gift. Because that's how I see it. This gift that I have now, this ability to write, is a tortured one. It doesn't come from a good place, but it helps others. So, and if it's helping other people, then I'm continuing with Michael's legacy.
Yeah, I can relate with you there as well. You know, I grew up in the special school system. I couldn't read or write until I was like 20, 21. You know, I could barely write my name, and I always said if I'd learned to read and write, I'd be dangerous. And all I ever wanted to do was write a book, and I got obsessed with it, and I could never do it because it was just the fear. And then I went through years of just, you know, I went through some years of sobriety, and then some years of not sort of full on in the addiction and homelessness and stuff like that. And once I got around the fear and I started writing, I was never meant to be this. I was never meant to be a journalist. I was always told I'd never amount to anything. I'd never even write a book. You know, I've been a part of 5 books, you know, written 2 on my own, and 1 with 2 other people. And because of the way that my head is, I will have it, you know, I'll say I want to write this book and I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I'll get hit by just the trauma and the bad feelings. You know, just because I'm sober doesn't mean that I don't still suffer with the mental health issues. And then by the time I know it, a year's gone by and I haven't written anything. And I've got 3 or 4 people wanting me to write for them. And I can't get my head around it. I can't even focus on a piece of paper to be able to write anything down. I can't focus, you know. But there is a catharsis in there. And within the, you know, my first book was born from the pain of the trauma that I'd lived in my life through the mental illness and the loss to suicide and murder, you know. And I found myself, you know, 20 odd years down the line, get this book out, and I rushed it out, I'll admit that. But you know, I then wrote another book, and then lockdown hit, and then I started suffering with the mental illness again. And a friend of mine who's a hostage and barricade negotiator is coming on next week again for part 3. Jason Edwards, we were having a chat, and he's like, well, you know, just do it. So I started, called it Shed X, because we both tried to get TEDx talks, but we got turned down. Started it from my living room. And while I was doing it from my living room, I was building the shed. And that's how this was born. And kind of, I've really thrown myself into it. You know, I've done nearly 40 of these interviews, and I've shared my story a few times, and you know, I've been really blessed. But it doesn't make up for the loss. And I think that's something that we you know, being creative and being in trauma, we try and use this as a thing to, I won't say feel better, but to feel, if you know what I mean. Because I've got to be honest, I every interview that I do, I put part of me in, and because I like to educate. And I think that some people just watch it and they think, oh, you know, it's just going to be about crime and stuff like that. And, you know, it's nice to get people on. It's nice to get celebrities on. I've had a few celebrities on. It's nice. But at the end of the day, there's so many people out there that don't know about these charities that start suffering alone at home, and they don't feel like they've got a voice. So many years I felt like I didn't have a voice, I was voiceless, which is why I swore to give a voice to those that don't have one. But in doing so, I kind of lost my voice. And, I've started reclaiming that with this. But, people need to know this is how we think. And it's normal. It is normal to... It's a normal part of grief, whether we like it or not. And we all deal with it in different ways. You said that you put your body through some pretty difficult challenges, and the body is connected to the mind. But what do we do? What else can we do?
And that's exactly it, isn't it? What else can we do? Because if we do nothing, then we could end up going down the wrong road, the wrong dark path. I think 90 odd % of addiction is trauma related. When I first started talking and writing, it was kind of for me to let the world know how I felt. But the more people that have resonated with what I say, and the more people that have said to me, that's how I feel, but I can't put it into words, the more I now feel like I'm not just a voice for myself, I'm a voice for all those that cannot put it into words, that can't do things like this. Everybody can do a podcast, not everybody can do a newspaper interview or a TV interview. So like I say, now I feel like I'm representing everyone, and how they're feeling. So yes, the more years have gone on, the more complex my life has become. The more avenues that I've been presented with, like this one yourself, or because I put a comment on Facebook. It's led to you inviting me to sort of come and talk tonight. Yeah, I don't have anything in place. If I wasn't doing this, I don't know. I don't even know if I'd be here.
No. I mean, for me, a big part of it is my family. Because when I was on self-destruct, I pretty much lost everything. But I found myself destitute in a food bank coffee morning, and that smile from the lady behind the counter who took pity on me and took me for a sandwich and bought me tobacco, and I married her. She was the angel. And it's not, relationships aren't always plain sailing. We've got kids, and she's been there for me through thick and thin, and she's seen me grow, and she's also seen me and been with me when I've lost, when I lost my mum, and when I lost Luna, and when everything's been low, it's that love, and that family that has kept me grounded. And it's great that I have got a really good network of people from church who I keep in touch with, and they keep in touch with me. We're like, they're an extended part of the family, and they are there to help if and when the proverbial hits the fan, which it sometimes does. And they were there when I lost my mum and when I lost Luna. They were there when I was in hospital losing my life, and it was You know, I don't think I'd be here without that. I wouldn't be here without that connection, because the thing about addiction is that it's a loss of connection, and it's not just a connection that we lose with people outside. It's not a connection that we lose with our family. It's not just the connection we lose with our friends. It's a connection we lose with ourselves. And you know, when we, the same with grief and trauma, we lose it. You know, we lose connection.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. If it wasn't for my, you know, the two kids I had at the time, I generally don't think I'd be here now. I think I would. The reason I made contact with Sam National in the first place was for my family, for my kids especially. My eldest, sorry, he was 10 when my brother was murdered, and having to sit him down and explain to him what happened to his uncle is by far the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. When Mike was first murdered, I originally told him that Uncle Michael fell asleep and didn't wake up, and he got angry, and his schooling was affected, and he was just constantly asking why. Why didn't he wake up? When are we going to be told why he didn't wake up? And then at Christmas, he started typing in our family names into my mum's laptop, and luckily he put his sisters in first, and my mum clocked it and told me. But if he had put in my brother's name, it would have come up what happened to my brother. So I then had to make that choice to sit him down and tell him the truth, and it had to come from me. And how difficult his life was multiplied by a million in that one conversation. He was a reasonably talented football player, stopped playing football, didn't play football for 3 years. His schooling went downhill. It's struggled for a good few years to sort of get him back on a reasonable track. The other Friday, I actually took him for trials in London to go and play football at university in America, and he got through.
Nice.
But like I say, it's those connections, and it's having those people in our lives to show us that love, support, guidance. You know, especially through those dark days, which you know we still have.
Yeah.
One thing I've always said: the only thing we've got 100% control of is our attitude. It's the only thing we've got 100% control of, and that can be a negative attitude or a positive attitude. Obviously, when Mike was first taken, my attitude was 100% negative, 100% negative, and it was only, like I say, when I made contact with Sam National and I got that love and that support and that guidance, then did my attitude flip from a negative one to a positive one, and I was able to obviously take on these challenges. And it's that whole light at the end of the tunnel thing, isn't it? No, I'd say that the light on the end of my tunnel was like on a dimmer switch. That's how I put it. You know, sometimes it's a bit dark, sometimes it's a bit light. But it's having that right attitude to try and be in control of that dimmer switch myself.
Yeah.
But as we know, you know, mental health and our brains, they're powerful tools, aren't they?
Yeah.
That we can't always control.
No. And you know, it is the subconscious that we can't control. And you know, these are the things that affect us, like, you know, within complex PTSD, and you know, within the dreams and the flashbacks. You know, that's probably when I started them, that was the hardest sort of thing that I had to deal with, because I no longer had, you see, this might sound a bit religious and stuff to some people, but I asked God to remove my want, my thirst, my hunger for drink and drugs. And on a daily basis, he takes that away. And you know, I've over 7 years now, I've been clean, but trauma, it affects us in such a way that those dreams become waking dreams, those things become triggers, and we have to relearn life. And for a 44-year-old man still going through this, you know, I'm nowhere near like long in the tooth, but you know, it's not easy, and you know yourself being a adult is hard, especially, you know, being a certain age and then having to relearn everything again and having to learn how to look at things differently, how to behave differently, how to think differently, how to manage when you have a flashback in the middle of Morrison's while you've got 3 kids with you, 4 kids with you, how you deal with not being able to sleep or waking up tired because it's just been so difficult at night.
Sleep, you know, sleep deprivation is used as torture in some countries, isn't it? And
It is.
I completely understand why. My sleeps for the last 6 years has just been shot to pieces. And on top of that, you know, like you was just saying, we wake up into our nightmare. We don't always necessarily wake from a nightmare. We wake into a nightmare. So we've been having nightmares at night, and then we wake up to this life that we've now got to try and live. Like you say, it's draining. And I've said this before. When I say to people that I'm tired, it's not always necessarily lack of sleep.
No.
I'm mentally tired, physically tired, emotionally tired. My soul is tired. My heart is tired. You know, it's from having to, like you say, try and find ways of living this new life that was inflicted on us.
Yeah.
Well,
It's not something we ask for, is it? It's not something anybody would ask for.
No, exactly.
You know, I do know there are a few people on this page that have lost people to murder. You know, and I do invite you to step forward as well and chat about it. I think one of the ways that I deal with it better is this.
Yeah.
Engaging in conversation with other people that have gone through the similar sort of things, especially men.
I'm glad you said
that. I think there is so much stigma around men's mental health. It's ridiculous. The amount of times I've been told to man up, get on with it. It's ridiculous, because there's a toxicity about it. And you know, lost somebody to suicide. A friend of mine's to suicide this year. You know, Jermaine Davis.
Yeah, I know.
You know, that was really sad, and it came out of nowhere. And you never, you know, they say about, you know, you never know the journey a man has to take until you've walked a mile in his shoes. Sometimes it's not even walking a mile in the shoes, it's wearing in those shoes. Because sometimes those shoes are, well, you know, the metaphorical thing for me with shoes is that when I was homeless, I was walking 7 miles a day to see my daughter. And shoes would only last a short amount of time. they would be battered. You know, pair of 20 quid trainers have gone in a month. You know, I put my body through some horrendous stuff, but it's nowhere near as the stuff that I put my mind through. And I think that when all you've got in your life is that negativity and that blood and that gore and that, you know, the trauma and the hate and the hurt, because when we're hurt, we do things that we don't mean and we say things that we don't mean. And we push people away and we push family away and, you know, people that we love. And that causes that break in connection, because it's not, you know, it's how we deal with these traumas that causes these breaks in communication and families, because nobody's going to expect you to deal with it well. I don't deal with change well. I don't deal with hurt well. And when I'm hurt, I lash out. And I can only imagine that, you know, you like me and other people like you and me pretty much do the same. It's a learned behaviour, and it's something that I think that we need to unlearn. One thing that I've learned while doing these, you know, especially speaking to people like Jay Haston and Angela Haston from the Wave Trust, and building a trauma-informed society, is that the trauma that we live sometimes isn't asked to harbour.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on obviously male talking. That's one of the things I've also been trying to do over these last 6 years, is get more men talking, because there is that macho mentality, isn't there, that's been sort of brought up from the 50s, 60s, 70s, that if men talk, it's a sign of weakness. If they show emotion, it's a sign of weakness. If they cry, it's a sign of weakness. And it's not. It's actually a sign of strength. It's a brave thing to do, to talk about how you're feeling. So obviously what you're doing is obviously an incredible thing, by getting people to come on and you know, sort of open up and tell their story.
I think for me, I like to tell stories, because I think we all have stories. I like to write stories and stuff like that, but I really like to listen to other people's stories, because I like to spend some time in their shoes, and sometimes them shoes are similar to my shoes. But you know, experience is the thing that bonds us as men. Now, I love my dad to bits. I love my mum, you know, I'm a doctor. I love my mum and dad to bits. But I grew up in a mining town. Well, not a mining town, a market town surrounded by mining towns in West Yorkshire. So in the 80s. So you can imagine the sort of mentality that people had around those days, around the way that men should act and men should be, and how men should feel and what men should do and how men should speak, how men should dress. You know, and a lot of it is toxic. You know, a man supplies for his family. Well, sometimes a man can't always supply for his family. You know, a man doesn't cry or show his emotions in front of his family. Well, that's not, we know that's not true, because actually having emotion is one of the key things to life, and being able to share that with your family is healthy.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a toxic way of thinking, and it's not their fault. You know, it's not. You know, it is a generational thing. You know, I mean, my parents are in their 80s. you know, my granddad was born in 1900, I think. So, it's these are all these things that I was exposed to as a kid. In schools, and teachers would tell you how to think, and it was also so different. When a teacher could crack your ass for being bad, and it's all changed. And some people see this as a bad thing, and it isn't. The thing that I hate is a word. Well, I hate two words: snowflake and Karens. I've got a sister called Karen, so it is a little bit funny. But you can't fight toxicity and toxic behaviour with toxicity and toxic behaviour.
Yep.
Yeah. So you call somebody a snowflake and they call you a Karen. That's two opposite sides of the coin that are going at each other, and it's just fighting toxicity with toxicity, and it's never going to work out right.
No, you can't fight anger with anger. You can only fight anger with love and affection.
Exactly. So we have to change the way that we think. We have to change the way that we believe. And people are like, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm too old for that." You're never too old to learn. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. A leopard might not be able to change its spots, but actually it can change its behavior, and that's where it is. I hate that saying, a leopard can't change its spots. It can.
You're never too old to learn. Never too old to learn. And that's one of the things, like, I'm doing the same as what you're doing. We're trying to educate people. And one of the things I say, when pain becomes your teacher, that qualifies you to educate others. And trauma is pain.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And it's how I can physically, I possibly not anymore, but when I was younger, physically I could take a beating easy enough. It didn't even bother me for a long time. But the thing that I couldn't handle was the mental stuff, the names, and the way that I was treated. And sometimes that was in with my own family that believed that they were trying to help or saying something nice, but then turned out to be not underhanded, but sort of backhanded, unintentionally, because of the way that people thought, especially in the north. It's not just a northern thing; it happens all over the world. But the way that it was growing up in the north, it wasn't easy. Mentally, physically, it was a bit rough, but mentally, it wasn't easy. And I think once you've got trauma, then trauma starts to build and build and build and build and build and build. There's only so much that you can hold in before you start to lose it. And then, the trauma from the childhood, you might be able to hold that back, but then when the next trauma comes in, the big one, losing someone, violently or not, it opens up a whole,
We'll resurface old traumas.
Yeah, and it's how we deal with that now that counts, because we're educated. Back then we had an excuse because we weren't educated, but now we're educated. And I'd like to say that I've said a few times in this that educating other people is what I need to do. It's one of the reasons that you know, that keeps me going through the day. I love to educate, you know, and I think if one person listens to this, watches this, listens to this, it'll be going on YouTube at some point this week, and then it'll be going onto my website. So people that don't have Facebook can watch it as well. You know, what would you say to someone that is going through this at the very minute, that is the start of their journey?
If the first thing I always ask, if I find or speak to anybody that's ever had a loved one taken by murder and manslaughter, the first thing I always ask is, have you had contact with Sam National? Always the first thing I say. And they either have or they haven't, and then I'll send them a link to the Sam National website and explain a bit about what they do. I'll then tell them about my Facebook page, and just have a rolling conversation. Try to sort of establish where they're at in their head, because you've got to be careful. Like I said, we go through so many different emotions. So you need to be, depending on what emotion they're going through at that time, you need to be careful as to what you say to them in that moment. A saying that I come up with a little while ago is, distractions are good, but you can't put a plaster on something that needs stitches. So you need to tend to that wound. You know, like all these things that I do, yes, they're distractions, but am I actually tending to the wound? Probably not. I am a massive hypocrite, because I love to give the best advice in the world, but I don't always sort of take on board what I'm saying. And I take care of you first. You know, I've said to my mum, yes, you are a mum, but you also need to be Helen as well. Yes, you want to, you know, look after the surviving siblings, but you also need to look after yourself as well. The one thing I probably struggle with the most is not being able to fix this for my family. You know, I always thought that there wouldn't be a single battle that I couldn't fight and win for my family. But when I stood at that grave and I saw my mum clawing at the earth, screaming her son's name, and the bloodshot eyes of my siblings crushing, their souls crushing inside them, I've never felt so weak and helpless in all my life. Because I knew there was nothing I could say or do. Literally nothing. So we have to self-love, self-care. I hate the fact that people, I say hate, that maybe we're all guilty of comparing and contrasting, aren't we?
Yeah.
And people will listen to me and hear about everything that I've ever done. And I don't want that to make people feel inadequate. You know, I don't want people to think, well, he's done that, but I can't do that. Look, if the best thing you've done on a single particular day is get up and have a wash and get dressed, fair play to you. Because sometimes that could be the most hardest part of the day. What is a mountain to you one day might be my molehill, but that works both ways. What might be your molehill one day would be my mountain. So I'm trying to get that comparing and contrasting eradicated, and people just worry about themselves. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. Just worry about what you're doing. You know, like I say, the best thing you've done on a particular day is take yourself to the shop and get a loaf of bread. No, fair play to you. You know, mental health is so complex and powerful. So just people need to concentrate on themselves. Look after number one. And say, tend to that wound. Don't start putting plasters on things that need stitches.
Yeah, I like that. I've not heard that one before. just trying to find the number of Sam National so we can sort of get that out. I will put it up on the YouTube video. I'll put it up on my website, and I'll also put it up in the comments on here. I'll also put a link to Eugene's Facebook and things like that. And if anybody is really sort of struggling, please do get in touch, and we'll try and signpost you to the right place. You know, you know, if you've learned one thing tonight, is that probably one of the most effective ways to get through this is to talk.
100%.
Because if we don't talk, how are people supposed to know? I think, you know.
Yeah, definitely. People, if you don't talk, people don't know. But all the time that you're bottling up everything inside, you know, you're only going to be able to withstand it for so long. There's going to be a moment where you will self-implode, and it's not good.
It's not, and it's that like you said earlier, that it's that self-harm comes in many forms. And for me, that's self-sabotage. You know, cutting ties with people and stopping doing things that I enjoy. You know, my dad used to say it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You know, just because we give up the chemicals doesn't mean that we give up what's in here, because the chemicals mask them for so long. You know, the best thing about getting sober is that your emotions come back, and the worst thing about getting sober, your emotions come back, and twice as hard, and it's going to floor you. And yeah, I mean, I can't bang on enough about it's about learning, relearning, especially how to think, how to act, how to just communicate with other people, just how to be. And the thing that I found the hardest was how to be in my own head.
It's recognising the signs as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, these things come out and they externalize. You know, the anger, the hurt. You know, the anger is the first one. It's the primary, because that's the primal. I suppose that's the primal thing in all of us, the anger, because it gets the endorphins going, it gets the adrenaline going, you know, it gets the serotonin moving, and it keeps us alive. It's a survival technique, and many of us, when we've been victims, stay victims, and then some come from victim to survivor, and you stay in that survivor mode. And yeah, it's great that you're a survivor, but what people don't realize is that you know, the progression from victim to survivor, and then the progression from survivor to thriver, because we're meant to thrive, and we can't do that if we're stuck in a mode, you know, and going through anger, denial, you know, all these things that come to us. You know, I forget what the 5 things are: anger, denial, you know, guilt,
confusion, frustration, sadness.
Yeah,
probably go on.
it does. It does. And we can't limit it. And I think
strive to live.
Yeah, it's a mode that we get stuck in. On that road of life, and we get stuck in it. And some people never get out of it because they never tackle what's at the core. It's not always a head problem, it's sometimes a heart problem, and vice versa. Yeah, it's an emotional one for me, really. I kept my emotions in for so long now. I cry at the sad stories on X Factor. I have a, I have no problem in crying in front of people that I know, in front of my wife, in front of my kids. I've cried on here, listening to people's stories. And I think people need to see it. I think many might get a bit funny about it. But the way I see it is, how do we know how we're supposed to act as men until we see other men acting like they should? And you doing this and talking to me and bringing up all these things, it's an emotional one for me. I've choked up a couple of times, I'm not going to lie.
I'll have a cry tonight.
Yeah.
Whenever I've done anything like this, whenever I've been to an event and spoken publicly, that night I always end up like sort of lighting a candle and having a bit of a sob. Normally in the missus' arms. But I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. I've cried. I've watched programs on TV about people that I now know, that are now on my social media, and I will sit there and I'll cry my eyes out like they're my family. And I think a part of that is because I know exactly what they're going through. I feel every word they say. And also, I watched one the other day, and it was a 15-year-old lad. And I've spoke to his mum on social media, and I've bawled my eyes out. And I think I cried more at the fact that she was on there talking to herself. And I was listening to her talk, and it just really hit me really hard, because I felt everything that she was saying. I've got no issues with people knowing I cry. No issues at all.
It's a natural response. What is unnatural is keeping it in, but it's what we learn as children, and it's not necessarily the fault of our parents or the parents' parents. It clearly is a generational thing, but we're in such a place now where mental illness and addiction, and they're still stigmatized, but there is more ways to open up, and there is more ways for men and women to be able to put out their stories. I think that is Facebook can be a very toxic place, very, very toxic place. Ask on Twitter and other social networks. I'm not just going to limit it to Facebook, but because there are so many keyboard warriors out there, so many trolls that just get off on the fact that they're upsetting someone else, and if that's what they need to do to live, then I feel bad for them.
Media is both a gift and a curse, isn't it?
It is.
You know what I mean? I wouldn't have raised the money that I've raised for charity if it wasn't for media. And like you say, but then there's the other side of the coin with exactly what you're saying. The negativity and the trolling and the bitching and the moaning, and I've seen people like saying, "Oh, I'm having a nightmare or broke a nail." But really? Wow. I wish my nightmare was just a broken nail. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, whilst we are strong, we need to point out that, the wives, the girlfriends, the husbands, the partners, they're the ones that sometimes are the only thing that's holding us together. That, keeping that life together. They're the ones that, they're the arms that you're crying. They're the first thing you see when you wake up and the last thing you see when you go to bed. And that for me is the greatest grounder. I haven't always been the best partner. I haven't always been the best husband. I'm a cantankerous old fart at the best times. I struggle to deal with my emotions and my mental health sometimes. And my family and my wife get the brunt of it at times. My wife has mental health issues as well, and we get through it together, but it's not, I stand up proudly and say I get help for my mental health. I stand up proudly and say I've gone through trauma and I get help from my trauma, and I'm not perfect. I'm at times a broken human being. Most times I'm a broken human being.
There's no such thing as perfect people, only perfect intentions.
Exactly. We're not all who we appear to be on Facebook.
Definitely not.
No. I think with that, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we?
No. It's been a really nice open conversation. Thanks very much. Obviously, appreciate you having me on, so I can do the same as what you're doing, and that's educate people in life after murder and manslaughter and the trauma and the mental health aspects of it. So thanks very much. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank you for coming on, especially at such short notice as well. What I'd like to do is get a bunch of us together and do something like this, but we all talk about our stories and how we deal with it. Maybe 5 or 6 people that are going through the same thing. Maybe get Jason Edwards involved from he's not just a hostage negotiator. He's a very, very wise man when it comes to, he's trained in, he's not only trained in conflict resolution, but he's trained in things like how we deal with trauma and how we deal with things. So I think it might be nice to get a few people together and do some sort of video conference if you're up for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometime in the very near future.
Yeah.
If you just stay on for a few minutes, I'll wind up and then I'll cut the feed and we'll just have a quick chat.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for. I'll be going through the feed in a little while, and I see that there's been quite a lot of open conversation. I want to thank everybody that's contributed tonight. I'm sorry that I couldn't reply to. I have to concentrate on the interviews, but we are working on that. I have now moderators and admin that are going to be answering on the nights. I have Julie Major coming back on in the next week or so, I have Jason Edwards coming on for part 3 next week. We just got to arrange a day. So yeah, even though there hasn't been, this has been the first one in a few weeks, we're hoping to get 2 or 3 more over the next couple of weeks. Thank you all for your support. Can I ask, invite your friends to The Accidental Journalist. We're teetering on 1.5k. I think we need about another 47 people. Jump on the the YouTube page, like, subscribe. This video will be on there within the next few days. Please like the video, subscribe and share. Get the algorithms working for all of us, and let's get a message out there. And I shall see you again soon, guys. Cheers.